Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture the most stressful, high-stakes dinner party you can possibly imagine.
Right.
The seating chart is just a geopolitical nightmare. The appetizers might be radioactive, and everyone is giving everyone else the side eye.
Sounds like a typical Tuesday at the UN, really.
Exactly. But look at the tables. Over at table 1, you've got the United States, Japan, and Australia, the Quad. They're all toasting to democracy, talking about a free and open Indo-Pacific, and looking, very warily over at China. And sitting right there, clinking glasses, laughing at the jokes, is India.
A very prominent seat right at the head of that table.
Right. But then you glance across the room to table 2, BRICS table.
Right.
You've got China, you have Russia, the so-called revisionist powers, the ones actively challenging the Western order. And guess who is also sitting right there, passing the bread rolls?
India.
And just feels completely schizophrenic. To the average person, or even someone who follows the news, it just looks like India's confused.
Or maybe just playing both sides.
Yes. A two-faced friend. I mean, how can you be in a group designed to counterbalance China while you're simultaneously hugging it out in a group co-led by China? So the big question is India just bad at picking a team?
It's the question that absolutely drives Western policymakers crazy. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you look at the source material we have for this deep dive, specifically on India's modern grand strategy, what looks like confusion is, well, it's actually a highly sophisticated, deliberate design.
So it's not indecision, it's a strategy.
It is the strategy. The argument is that India isn't failing to pick a side. They are aggressively refusing to pick a side because they believe the whole concept of sides is a relic of the past.
A concept called multi-alignment. It sounds a little bit like corporate buzzword bingo. Synergistic multi-alignment.
It does, but the stakes here are, nuclear. Today, our mission is to figure out how India pulls this high-wire act off without falling. We're going to look at how they manage to be strategic partners with the U.S. while remaining Russia's biggest defense client.
And how they navigate the absolute minefield of the Middle East.
Exactly, and why this might actually be the blueprint for how the entire world works in the 2030s.
Okay, well, to understand the multi, we probably need to look at what came before. Because for the longest time, I remember from history class, India was the poster child for non-alignment.
Right, and we have to clear up a massive misconception here right off the bat. Most people hear non-alignment, the Cold War policy, and they think it meant neutrality, like Switzerland.
Just staying out of it, keeping your head down.
That's the common misunderstanding. But the sources point out that non-alignment was never about passivity. It was always about something called strategic autonomy.
That phrase is all over these documents. So what does strategic autonomy actually mean in plain English?
It's the DNA of Indian foreign policy. I mean, think about when this started in 1947. India had just thrown off the British Empire. The last thing they wanted was to immediately become a junior partner to another empire, whether that was Washington or Moscow.
So non-alignment was really just a declaration of independence.
Precisely. It meant preserving the right to decide for yourself based on your own interests, not because a superpower told you to.
Okay, that makes sense. We're the boss of us. But that was a bipolar world. Two giants. The world is a lot messier now.
A lot messier. The whole structure has collapsed. We don't have two superpowers anymore. We have a multipolar world. You have the U.S., sure, still the military and tech giant, but then you have China as a systemic challenger.
You have Europe as a regulatory superpower.
Right, Russia with its military leverage.
Yeah.
And then you have all these rising middle powers like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and of course India itself.
So in a world with 5 or 6 different power centers, you can't just opt out.
You can't just stay home. If non-alignment was, I'm not going to the party. Multi-alignment is, I'm going to every single party I was invited to, and I'm eating all the appetizers at all of them.
I like that distinction, but it seems risky. Usually in geopolitics, we talk about alliances as marriages. NATO is a marriage. Till death do us part. You put a ring on it.
And that's the Western model. Rigid, treaty-based. But the source material highlights that India sees that model as obsolete for its own purposes. They've adopted what they call a modular approach to partnerships.
Modular?
Think of it less like a marriage and more like, well, issue-based partnerships.
Yeah.
Or maybe the gig economy of alliances.
Okay, break that down for me.
So instead of one best friend or a spouse who helps you with everything, security, trade, tech, energy, India picks specific teammates for specific sports.
Give me the lineup.
Okay. For maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, they look to the U.S. and Japan. For energy security, they turn to Russia or the Gulf states. For tech, Israel and France.
So they're customizing their foreign policy stack. It's like ordering a la carte instead of from the set menu.
Precisely. The goal is to reduce vulnerability. If you're 100% dependent on the U.S. for security, you are beholden to Washington's whims. If they get mad at you, you're defenseless.
But if you spread your bets,
You maintain that precious strategic autonomy. You have leverage.
it sounds smart on paper, but let's look at the reality, because this freedom creates a lot of friction. The documents talk a lot about the Quad. US, Japan, Australia, India. A lot of hawks in Washington call it the Asian NATO.
And if you say Asian NATO to an Indian diplomat, they will physically recoil.
Why? I mean, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, they're doing naval exercises together, they're sharing intelligence.
Because NATO implies a treaty obligation. Article 5. If China attacks Japan, a NATO-style treaty would mean India must go to war. India categorically refuses to sign up for that.
So the source says they see it as a strategic partnership, not a military alliance.
Yes, and that sounds like splitting hairs, I know.
Yeah, like we're not dating, we're just hanging out.
But it's a massive distinction in international law.
Yeah.
It means they cooperate on shared interests, keeping shipping lanes open, disaster relief, supply chains. But it is, and this is the key phrase from the text, alignment without entanglement.
Alignment without entanglement. That is catchy.
It's the perfect summary. They want the intelligence sharing, the high-tech cooperation, the access to U.S. markets, but they want the freedom to say no if the U.S. gets into a conflict that doesn't serve India's interest.
They want the benefits of the club membership without paying the dues of going to war.
That's one way to put it. They would say they are preserving their sovereignty.
Yeah.
But you're right, it frustrates Western partners who want a commitment. And nothing tests that frustration more than the absolute elephant in the room, Russia.
Yeah, we have to go there. This is where the multi-alignment thing starts to smell a bit like opportunism to a lot of Western listeners.
It's the ultimate stress test for the strategy, no doubt.
I mean, just look at the last few years. The West sanctions Russia, tries to isolate Putin completely,
Yeah.
and there's India buying the S-400 missile system and record amounts of Russian oil. It feels like a betrayal of the partnership they're building with the U.S. How do they square that circle? How do they even justify it?
The source material frames this very clearly. It's not about nostalgia. It's not that they just love the old Soviet days. It is cold, hard, strategic pragmatism.
Give me the pragmatic argument.
Yeah.
Because buying weapons from a country that's actively invading its neighbor looks pretty bad on the resume.
Reason number one is dependency. And we have to look at the hardware. Something like 60 to 70% of India's military platforms are of Russian origin. Tanks, jets, submarines.
That much.
It's massive, a legacy of the Cold War. You can't switch that off overnight. You can't just swap a Russian engine for an American one in a fighter jet. If they cut ties with Russia today, their air force is effectively grounded in 6 months. They need spare parts, they need upgrades.
Okay, so they're kind of trapped by their legacy hardware. That's a practical reality. But what about the oil? They're buying billions in crude. That's not legacy, that's new.
That is economic opportunism, sure, getting cheap energy for a developing nation. But there's a deeper geopolitical game here that the sources highlight, and this is the insight that often gets missed. India is terrified of a Russia that is 100% dependent on China.
Unpack that. Why does New Delhi care if Moscow and Beijing are best buddies?
Because China is India's main rival. Think about it. If Russia is completely isolated by the West, they have nowhere else to turn but China. Russia becomes a vassal state, a junior partner to Beijing.
And if your main weapons supplier is owned by your main enemy,
You're in big, big trouble. Exactly. If Beijing can tell Moscow, hey, stop sending spare parts to India, India is defenseless. So India is engaging Russia partly to give Moscow an option that isn't China.
wow. So by buying that oil, they're arguing that they are actually helping the global balance of power by keeping Russia from falling completely into China's lap.
That is the argument. And honestly, the West seems to quietly accept it. I mean, notice that the U.S. hasn't sanctioned India for this.
I have noticed that. It's a very loud silence.
And there's another layer to the oil thing. The source calls it the laundromat effect. India buys cheap Russian crude, refines it in its own refineries, and then sells the diesel and jet fuel to Europe.
Wait, so Europe is technically buying Russian oil just processed through India?
That's right. It keeps global oil prices stable. If that Russian oil just vanished from the market, gas prices in the U.S. and Europe would skyrocket. So in a way, India is doing the dirty work that keeps the global economy humming.
That is incredibly cynical and incredibly brilliant.
That is multi-alignment. It's about extracting value from the chaos.
Okay, so we've got the Russia Balancing Act, but the source material mentions another region where this gets even more complicated, the Middle East.
The Middle East is the final boss of diplomatic difficulty.
Usually you're either Team Iran or Team Saudi Israel. You don't get to hang out with both.
And yet India does. They have a strategic partnership with Iran. They're developing the Chabahar port there to bypass Pakistan.
Yeah.
At the exact same time, their relationship with Israel is booming defense, ag tech, water tech, and they are best friends with the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
How does that not blow up in their face? How do they sit in a room with the Israelis on Monday and the Iranians on Tuesday?
Because India focuses on the bilateral. They tell Iran, our relationship with Israel is about us, not you. They tell Israel, our ties to Iran are about energy and connectivity, not ideology. And surprisingly, everyone seems to buy it.
But why? Why do these countries let India get away with it?
Because India isn't preaching. They aren't trying to overthrow regimes or lecture on human rights. They're strictly transactional. We want to trade. We want to build a corridor. There's even a grouping mentioned called I2U2.
Sounds like a robot from Star Wars.
It does. It stands for India, Israel, UAE, and the USA. It's a group focused on economic cooperation. The fact that India can sit in that group while still talking to Tehran just shows you the dexterity we're talking about.
It's impressive. But I keep coming back to the why. We've talked about Russia, we've talked about the Middle East, but it feels like all roads lead back to one country, the China challenge.
Yes, the central gravity of Indian foreign policy. Everything we just discussed, the Quad, the Russia pivot, the Middle East corridor, it's all about managing China.
The source describes this relationship as complicated, friend and foe.
Complicated is putting it mildly. People forget they have thousands of troops pointing guns at each other in the Himalayas. They had a deadly clash in 2020. People died. It's volatile.
But at the same time, China is one of India's biggest trading partners.
So it's adversarial engagement. The text calls it a search for strategic equilibrium. India knows it cannot defeat China in a head-to-head war right now. The gap in economic and military power is just too big, so multi-alignment is the equalizer.
How so?
They use the partnership with the U.S. and the Quad to provide deterrence, basically signaling to China, don't push us too far or we get closer to Washington. It's a leverage game. But by not signing a formal alliance, they keep a door open to talk to Beijing.
A modulation game.
Exactly. If India joined a formal Asian NATO, China might feel encircled and lash out. By staying aligned but not entangled, India keeps the temperature just below boiling. They want to manage China's rise, not trigger a war.
That's a very, very fine line to walk.
It is. And to maintain that balance, they need more than just guns and oil. They need the future. And the source spends a good amount of time on technology in the global south.
Yeah, this felt different from the usual tanks and borders talk. Why is tech part of grand strategy?
Because today, semiconductors are the new oil. AI is the new nuke. India realizes that to be a great power, you can't just buy tech, you have to make it.
Right.
So they're integrating into U.S. supply chains. There's this initiative called ICET to get access to critical tech transfer.
Right.
But again, the goal is autonomy.
They don't want to replace dependence on Chinese tech with dependence on American tech.
Bingo. They want to be a node, a manufacturer. They want to make the chips, not just import them. And they're using this tech prowess to position themselves as the leader of the global south.
We hear that term a lot. It feels a bit vague.
It's basically the developing world. Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, the countries that aren't in the G7. India is pitching itself as their voice. They are saying, look, you don't want to be bullied by China's debt traps, and you don't want to be lectured by the West. Follow our model.
Be like us. Be flexible.
Exactly. They are exporting the narrative of multi-alignment. Think about their digital payment system, UPI. They're offering that to other developing nations as an alternative to Western credit cards or Chinese systems. It's diplomatic leverage through software.
That's powerful. But I have to play devil's advocate here. We've spent all this time praising this agility, this 4D chess. But isn't there a massive risk?
Oh, huge risks.
The obvious one is trust. I mean, if you're the U.S. president and you share sensitive submarine tech with India, aren't you worried that an Indian engineer who was training in Russia last week might leak it?
That is the nightmare scenario for the Pentagon. Critics argue that if you're friends with everyone, you are friends with no one. Balancing too many partners just dilutes trust. If the chips are down, if a war actually starts, will anyone really come to save India?
Right. You call 911 and everyone sends you to voicemail because they're not sure whose side you're really on.
There's also the risk of clarity. Ambiguity is great for peacetime maneuvering. It's terrible for crisis management. If China doesn't know for sure that the U.S. will defend India, they might miscalculate. They might attack.
So a formal alliance can actually prevent war because the red lines are bright red.
Correct. Strategic ambiguity can invite aggression. But Indian policymakers are looking at the board and they're making a bet. They are betting that the world is moving away from those rigid blocks anyway.
The source suggests that, doesn't it? That the era of the alliance is dying.
It suggests we're moving toward ad hoc arrangements, networks, the gig economy of geopolitics you mentioned.
The gig economy of geopolitics. I love that. Everyone's a freelancer.
Essentially, you take a contract for security with one client, a contract for trade with another. India isn't just adapting to this, they are the prototype. They are showing the world how a major power behaves when there's no single hegemon running the show.
So what's the verdict? Is this sustainable? Can you juggle fire forever?
The Indian policymakers believe they have no choice. They believe becoming a junior partner to the U.S. would kill their rise. They would rather take the risk of isolation than the certainty of subordination.
Better lonely than owned.
And if they pull it off, if they can become a $10 trillion economy while keeping good ties with the West, leading the global South and managing Russia, they effectively break the binary of the last century.
It stops being the West versus the rest.
It becomes a true multipolar mesh, and India sits right in the center of the web.
It's a bold bet. And for us watching, it means we have to start looking for consistency in the old school sense. When we see India shaking hands with Putin one day and Biden the next, it's not hypocrisy.
It's the feature, not the bug. It's the new operating system.
I want to leave the listener with a provocative thought today. We all grew up in a world of clean lines, iron curtains, us and them. But if India is right, the future is going to be blurry. It's going to be transactional, messy, and fiercely independent. So the question is, as other powers rise, Brazil, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, will they look at India and say, that's the playbook? Are we watching the end of the alliance era in real time?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the answer might determine whether the 21st century is peaceful or chaotic.
Something to chew on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you for joining us on this Strategic Vanguard podcast. If you found value in this analysis, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you fresh podcasts every Monday here on YouTube and Rumble, and you can also catch the audio versions on Spotify and Amazon Music. Just search for Strategic Vanguard Podcast. For more insights, articles, and discussions, subscribe to our blog at strategicvanguard.com. Your support helps us grow and bring you more in-depth analysis on defense, geopolitics, and strategy. Until next time, stay informed, stay strategic.